I propose to run it in just three sections. One, what on earth's going on, who's running the place? Two, what does this mean about the nuclear side of North Korea? And three, just to have a little bit of Q&A about the nuclear proliferation generally that seems to be threatened around the world after that. So 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes. And I hope that suits you. And please, I'll take my lead from you. I'll be looking for questions as we go along. So I've prepared one line, which is that move over the millibans. There's only one family worth trying to work out. This one's even got a sister. So we'll find out now from our guests who they are, and then we'll explore the topic about who's running North Korea. So moving immediately to my left, Tim Tate, welcome. Who are you?
Thank you. I'm a late addition at this ball, I suspect. I'm a filmmaker and a journalist, and I'm here, I suspect, because this time last year I was inside North Korea making a film, and I've just also completed a programme on the arms race in the region in North Asia and in the South China Sea specifically.
Thank you very much for coming. And Ji Young Song, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm a research associate at the Centre of Migration Policy and Society at Oxford University, but I did my PhD on discourse analysis of human rights in the DPRK. So it's mainly analysis of North Korea propaganda, how they understand the new concept, Western concepts and other concepts.
And Charles?
I'm a journalist for BBC, mainly for BBC Radio, World Service Radio, but I did do 10 years in East Asia, and 7 years of that was in South Korea and Japan, and a lot of my time there was spent looking at North Korea and trying to work out what was going on. The BBC was banned from North Korea quite often. In fact, every time a journalist went in, we seemed to be banned again for another couple of years. But I did manage to get in for 2 major trips and 5 other scoots across the border. So got in a few times, but not as often as I would have liked.
Right, well, welcome. And next to you is Aidan Foster-Carter.
Hello, I don't belong here. I should be in the back row club or the safe distance club, because I have been following North Korea from 40 years. I have been there, but I mainly do it from a safe distance. I have an honorary post at Leeds University, and I live in Exeter, and I do actually make a living, much to my surprise, writing about both Koreas.
Well, you're very welcome. And in the front row is Mark Fitzpatrick, who's Director of Non-Proliferation and the Disarmament Programme at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and he'll come up in 20 minutes. And then you can tell us who you are then, if you don't mind.
You've just done it.
No, but you can do it again. So let's begin then. Would you all, first of all, start us off? Let's just go down the row that we've just the order with. How energised are you? How excited are you? How much are you going to tell us? We've had the first indication of this dynastic, weird ruling family who's going to take over. They're all completely, unperceivable. Will you tell us, what moment are we watching in North Korea?
And I had a horrible feeling you were going to ask me first. The simple answer is I don't know. I'm the wrong person to ask about the dynasty, but as a caveat, particularly with what's coming up from my left, I think you need to bear in mind that what we see from North Korea comes from one of two sources. It comes primarily from Washington, with a little bit from North Korea. And North Korea is spectacularly bad at handling propaganda of any description. And Washington, in my personal view, is spectacularly mendacious when it comes to North Korea. What does that mean for the dynasty? I have simply no idea.
Well, it didn't come as a surprise to me, because I've been following North Korean propaganda for my PhD and my previous degrees. And it was clear that North Korea was based on its ideology. First of all, it's post-colonialism and Marxism. And lastly, and most importantly, it's Confucianism. It's based on its traditional thoughts, such as Chinese Confucianism, but they inverted to Korean Confucianism, and Shirak, which is practical thinking, and lastly, Donghak is Eastern learning. So you have to see the whole picture. Probably it dressed up as a Marxist or a socialist, but what you can see deep inside their mentality is that they are based on their traditional ideas, traditional mentality to keep their country from Western influences or any other external influences. So Kim Jong Un was appointed as well, the media is describing Kim Jong Un was appointed as the next leader, but I don't think the succession process is still ongoing. We never know. He will pass the test ground for the legitimate leader of the country for the foreseeable future, and he has his aunt and his uncle to support him. But it's not clear that whether he can actually control the military as well as the party. So. Coming down from a grandfather to father and father to grandson, it doesn't come as a big surprise to me because it's actually based on this Confucian culture which focuses on family legacy.
Question a lot of journalists working in the area have had for quite a few years is what's taken them so long to bring one of these sons into the picture, because a dynastic succession was pretty obvious it was going to come at some point. But there seemed to be a remarkable lack of urgency when you think that Kim Jong Il got a good 30-year run at it before he succeeded in 1994, and he was very well prepared for the job. We've been expecting one of the sons to be nominated for a decade or so, and there's been a notable lack of urgency about it. I was last in North Korea in 2007, and one of the things we were trying to do amongst the people we were allowed to talk to, as you understand, you're very tightly restricted and controlled in North Korea, especially as a journalist. But late at night over a few drinks with the people who were assigned to us, we would broach the question about Kim Jong Il's sons, and they would just kill the conversation dead. And that's understandable in a way, because that's the one area you have to be ultra cautious about in North Korea. Any insult to the leader could result in a death sentence. So that's an area where, when they're all watching each other, they're going to be extremely cautious. But all of the journalists there who were with me formed the very distinct impression that none of these people knew who Kim Jong Il's sons were. So this guy, Kim Jong Un, has been introduced very recently, perhaps in the last year, to party members. He started appearing recently on Kim Jong Il's on-the-spot guidance tours around the countryside. He started appearing with oblique references in the press. A character called the Brilliant Comrade has been referred to, which North Koreans have to try and work out who that could be. In a sense, that's quite odd that they didn't know who Kim Jong Il's sons were, because the cult of personality focuses obviously on Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong Il. It's the two photographs in every home, in every office of the father and the son. But it's not just those two. It's a revolutionary family that has almost godlike status. And Kim Il-sung's mother is the mother of the nation. Kim Il-sung's first wife, who died many years ago, is referred to as the mother of the revolution. Kim Il-sung's brother was a famous revolutionary fighter. So there are these figures that are taught to kids from the very minute they go to kindergarten, this pantheon of great Kims. And yet nobody knew anything about the sons. But there they are. They've been introduced, and he's now a 4-star general. So there you go.
I'd like to quote Trotsky. I mean, who doesn't? Used to do that a lot in my youth. I used to be a sociologist, so I'm going to try and look at this, God help me, analytically. Some of you may know this quote. Before Trotsky was a Trotskyist, when he was criticizing Lenin for this ludicrous and palpably undemocratic idea that would only lead to tears, as it did, that somehow an elite can substitute for the mass and know better, Trotsky wrote as follows. In inner-party politics, these methods lead, as we shall yet see, to this. The party organization substitutes itself for the party, the central committee substitutes itself for the organization, and finally, a dictator substitutes himself for the central committee. How right he was. And the ice pick showed it. Had Trotsky lived, and had he lived to see the extreme, grotesque parody of Leninism and Stalinism, which is North Korea today, I think he would have added 2 further stages. First of all, naked power, because by this stage, one person's in control, and that's really what it's about behind all the ideology, rests ultimately on whom? On the military. It's no accident that in the 16 years that Kim Jong Il has been in power, North Korea, already hardly unmilitarized, has explicitly adopted what is called in Korean Songun, a military-first policy. That is where the power lies in North Korea. The key question now is whether, if you're a genuine KPA, Korean People's Army 4-star general, what on earth do you think when this ridiculous whippersnapper of 27, and for that matter, an amiable and able economist lady of 60, That's Kim Jong Il's sister, Kim Jong Il. Both get appointed 4-star military generals. That's a serious rank. What do you really think? Do you accept these people? So stage one, sorry, the post-Trotsky stage one, it goes to the military. Secondly, Trotsky didn't deal with the succession. Well, if you've had all the previous stages, what on earth are you going to do? Contradictory and ridiculous as it may seem, and for long years, I'm old enough to remember when we heard the rumours of the first succession, the North Koreans denied it and said, no, of course not, completely incompatible with socialism. You get, for what for all practical purposes is a monarchy. I'll just say one other thing for now. We don't know if this succession will succeed. I mean, everything teaches us that these things are the Achilles heel of dictatorships. As Charles has said, I mean, they started preparing this terribly, terribly late. Kim Il-sung did much better by his son, Kim Jong Il. It was done over a very long period. Of course, there is politics going on in North Korea. They hide it behind a mask of theatre, but they disagree about, they must disagree about policy. The country is out of road. It's not going anywhere. There must be some people who would like to make peace. There must be some people who would like at least Chinese-style economic reform. Those are not quite the same things, but it both moves towards sense. Secondly, there's the naked power struggle. You might think no one really wants to run North Korea, but Kim Jong Un has leapfrogged over 2 elder brothers. We don't know how they feel about it. Kim Jong-nam, the one in Macau, whose adventures are well known, has apparently disappeared from Macau. We may see more of him. And thirdly, don't forget, rather ominously, I'll finish with this for now, the role of outside powers. I wrote recently in an article in Financial Times, and I'm a recent convert to this view, that I think North Korea is going to become a pliant satellite of China. I could elaborate why, but I think you've heard enough of me for now, and I'll stop there.
Please don't feel under pressure to complete in a certain time. I've certainly learned to not, just by heading down in this direction already. It's a very interesting briefing already for me. I don't know about everyone else, and I don't care either. So I'm just trying to catch your eye, just because I'm reminding you it is a public meeting, and this is 10 minutes more on this section, which is who the hell's in charge. And if you're not going to catch my eye, I've got a couple of questions. Firstly, to you as a panel, will you store up moments of which you disagree with each other, which is my second question. Yep. My first question to you all, and I'll begin with you, if I may, is if they're so strong, then how is this old dodgy man who makes his own clothes and likes drinking Jack Daniels, how is he actually really running anything? And how can this 28-year-old nobody run the army? Aren't they all a bunch of old puppets?
Well, I don't think Kim Jong Il is strong at the moment. We see his, ailing health, and he needs a successor. And it's like the other panelists said, the succession process started in a very hasty environment. He had to give a power, but it's not really giving actual power to his son. But there is a very complicated power struggle within the family, probably within the party and within the military.
Puppets?
I don't think he's puppet at all.
There's no evidence for that, but then there's no evidence for a lot of things in North Korea. One thing you could say is that whether Kim Jong Il is a puppet, and the consensus view is certainly that he isn't. I mean, he did have 20, 30 years to build up patronage networks and to build up his contacts within the ruling party, and he seems to be nominating people who are close to him. For example, his sister's just come into a very high-profile position. The question about whether Kim Jong Un will be a puppet is that's much more likely. But either way, the people who are in control do seem to need the dynasty. This is a state that had its legitimacy was based on ultra-Korean nationalism and on economic objectives. The idea was that everyone would live well and would have 3 bowls of rice a day. And the legitimacy, that's all gone now. It's obvious that North Korea lost the battle with South Korea. Even the North Koreans know that they're not living in paradise. The only thing that gives this particular regime legitimacy is the dynasty that's related to Kim Il-sung, the man who liberated Korea and made it a strong country, as they think.
Much the same, really. Kim Jong-il, by all accounts, is a micromanager. I mean, he had to acquire this position. Way back, there was a half-brother, Kim Pyong-il. There still is. He's currently North Korean ambassador in Poland. He's had a series of posts in Eastern Europe, a safe distance away from Pyongyang. He had to win out a struggle, in fact, against his own uncle, who is thought to be still alive, Kim Il-sung's brother, Kim Yong-ju, at the age of 90. So Kim Jong-il, by all accounts, is a sort of, and I agree, North Korea is rather an evidence-free zone. So we all sit here and make it up. No, we don't. We do our best. But I mean, by all accounts, he is a micromanager. He sends faxes, possibly even emails nowadays, in the middle of the night. So I think of him as a nowadays rather shriveled spider at the centre of what I would call a web, except that webs, being well designed, have got lateral connections. It's more like the hub of a bicycle, because one of the bizarre things about North Korea, very, very much attested, is that if you're in organisation A, then all that matters is the top, ultimately the leader, and below you, and at your peril, literally at your peril, do you make any contact with anybody in some other organisation. So if there's only him, and of course a staff, because you have to have a staff, then if he gets sick, as he is, then they're in trouble. And of course there's nothing automatic that transfers that legitimacy to the younger man, so I think he would be a puppet for the one person we haven't mentioned yet, Jang Song-taek, the dreaded brother-in-law.
Imagine receiving a fax in the middle of the night from Kim Jong Il. It's just...
You better not go home.
I want to ask a question. No, actually, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you.
We've never done that before.
Oh, is it wrong?
I don't know.
It's not North Korea, we're free, we can do what we like.
We can? Oh, that's great.
Sorry, great leader.
Why does it matter to you? Why are you here? Why are you asking? Why are we spending time asking, is this a dynasty? There's a reason I think...
No, let him answer. No, you've asked the question now.
I'm going to.
I talk continuously to Viktor Zelensky, the nuclear regulator, and also my childhood friend when I was 12 is now the Pentagon's last guy verifying Cuba nuclear career.
Use the microphone.
I think the question of spheres of influence is very interesting vis-à-vis the Chinese, and as I understand it, the Koreans have been turned over as a nuclear problem to the Chinese, essentially. And since we don't know where the Chinese are going, and I don't think the Chinese know where they're going, and they're evolving so incredibly quickly, I think it's really interesting to have this minor paradigm next door to see how it develops. So I'm quite interested to see what it might tell us about how an ex-communist party in one of these enormous Asian countries will be moving, actually. I mean, I think it will evolve. I don't think it can remain in a state of fructification like this.
Okay, and I'm going to take issue with you straight away. I suspect the reason why we're all here and why we talk about this and why my colleagues in the BBC and wherever else constantly churn this is because North Korea is perceived through a lens. I'm not here to defend North Korea. I am the last person to defend a state which persecutes its own citizens, as I believe it does. However, I believe we perceive North Korea, and that's particularly us in the media, perceive North Korea through a lens which says threat. And I'm not entirely sure that stands up.
Well,
I think that's... the specific nuclear stuff is for part two, isn't it? Now, that's what I wanted to pick up to when you said that before. I mean, I actually think that's bollocks. I think North Korea... we perceive North Korea as a threat because it is a threat. Did we make it up?
I'm sorry, to whom?
To everybody.
To whom?
Well, to the good taxpayers of this country because of their insurance fraud, for example, the state crime.
Well, I mean, you could make yes, that's true, and you could make the same argument about the fraudsters in Florida who make a living fleecing people on timeshare, and all of that represents a threat. What I'm talking about is a proportionate threat.
And let's just ask you. Use the microphone.
Well, I mean, I would quote Rory Stewart to you in a New York Review gathering here when some Chinese challenged
Use the microphone.
why the Chinese weren't being more respected as a Pacific power, and he said, well, we don't know where the Chinese are going, but it's conceivable. I mean, on the one hand, they could be the benefactors of the planet in the future. They could also make Nazi Germany look like Switzerland. That was his comment.
Okay.
So, given the extremities of that...
I've just actually come back from the US Naval War College, and I can tell you they take China very, very seriously in the Pacific.
If you sit in Seoul, there are 500 or so North Korean artillery tubes sort of pretty much directed on the city from a rather unpredictable
And indeed,
neighbour.
vice versa.
Well, they're not directed
Yes.
on Pyongyang.
That's not true. I mean, it's simply not true. If you look at South Korean military spending, even at a time when South Korea, in my view quite rightly, was trying to extend the hand of friendship to North Korea, South Korean military spending went up humongously. Now, if you're in the north, and bear in mind this is a country which still perceives itself and is legally and technically still at war, you are surrounded by American satellite states, all of whom are pointing weapons at you. Yes, you're going to have a militarized state, but if you look on any rational comparison, South Korea, I think, is the 46th biggest spender in the global arms spending tables, 46th or 47th, it spends a fraction of what one of its rival countries
Yeah, I know. I mean, North Korea has done a lot of illegal activities, but I'm not sure whether it's really a threat to the world or really a threat to
Not
British
remotely.
taxpayers. I'm not really convinced by that comment. It's not really democratic society, democratic regime or anything like that. But it just reminded me of the Western speculation back in 1994 when Kim Il-sung died. All the Western media said that North Korea will collapse and there will be no more North Korea at the northern part of the Korean Peninsula. But Kim Jong Il did survive, and then now it's probably the same thing happened to the North Korean regime, and it looks quite stable. It will be a testing ground for Kim Jong Un, but there are other people. Kim Jong Il, Jang Song-taek, and there's rising star Lee Yong-ho as well, who's supporting Kim Jong Un. So I'm not really seeing any sort of stability in terms of his regime.
And the three of you to the left of Tim disagree with this, whether the threat, but do you agree with this, whether the lens?
I don't disagree with Tim. I don't disagree with Tim. I was making a very specific point there about whether South Korean artillery tubes are reined in within range of the capital city, Pyongyang. That was a very specific point. And there's no doubt about it. North Korea has got genuine security concerns. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
Which
The Americans keep carrier fleets in the region. They do massive military exercises, which make the North Koreans feel uneasy. But having said that, North Korea is a totally untransparent regime, and they've shown consistently that they pull stunts and provocative actions in order to, but by building up their own threat, they use that to their diplomatic advantage.
Absolutely.
They have security concerns, but they're using their position in this very strategic part of Northeast Asia to extract goodies from the neighbours.
I'm conscious that, short time, these are very interesting questions. I mean, it's true about the disparity in military spending. The South has a lot of hardware and so forth. But I think the North Koreans are a threat, above all, to their own people. This was a regime, confession time, I was a teenage Kim Il-sung groupie. And the reason for that, there was
that
no
when you were also
excuse.
following Trotsky?
Trying to, and I was trying to be a Christian as well, The Confusions of Youth. And I bought the book that converted me to North Korea in the Hausman's Pacifist Bookshop. Don't ask. The point is that in those days, there was something a little bit to be proud of. It was still a very nasty regime, but so was the South Korea. That was under a military regime then. It's very unfair to call South Korea today a puppet. I think that would annoy a lot of South Koreans. I think it's inaccurate. And because North Korea basically chose to be Sparta, not that it wasn't threatened, but regardless of what it did, was seemingly unable or unwilling to sort of read the tea leaves when the signals changed at various times in Washington, when they changed at various times in Seoul, throughout the Sunshine period of the Sunshine policy of engagement from South Korea. The North, I mean, I missed that period. I wish it would come back, but the North continued to arm. But meanwhile, downhill, the Russians pull the plug out 20 years ago, as they do for everybody. The others adapt. Cuba goes for tourism. North Korea lets its people starve. So terrible privations of a humanitarian nature have been inflicted on its own people by this regime. And monstrous clean-up will be required. I mean, we've been celebrating with mixed emotions the reunification of Germany, and many commentaries have remarked how incomplete the process is, how attitudes haven't fully changed, how there is not full equality. Imagine what it's going to be like. North Koreans are physically smaller than South Koreans. I mean, I don't give a shit what anyone in Washington thinks. I do not see North Korea through any American lens. The Americans, government and ungovernment, are as confused as the rest of us. There are good ones, there are bad ones. I'm just not aware of this lens at all.
I just want to ask a very simple question, and I do not pretend, I promise you, to any great insight. It's just a simple question. When was the last time you were in North Korea?
Oh, long ago. I do it from the outside. But I mean, that won't wash, because you get the full range of opinion among those of us who've been there last week and those of us who were there, a year ago.
Going to North Korea actually inhibits your understanding of North Korea. I mean, I've been 5 times.
I would if I was allowed.
That's the most extraordinary journalistic statement I have ever heard in my life.
I'm an analyst. I'm an analyst. There's a real journalist.
It has distorted my perception because they control everything you see and everybody you talk to. The way to find out what's going on in North Korea is to go to the border between North Korea and China and talk to the people who are coming out, who could then tell you what's happening inside the country.
You don't think that distorts it as well?
Right.
Of course it distorts it.
And
everything distorts it.
And to the audience, with 5-minute warning to you, you're coming up in 5 minutes.
Well, I was there about a month ago, and I did chat to people.
What's your name? Where do you work?
Jake Sumner, and I was on holiday there. because I want to see what it's like. And the question is that basically, sorry, one point is they did feel threatened by China and South Korea and the world, and that was why they wanted to be a nuclear power, etc. That was the view. But actually there seemed to be, for the limited amount of people we actually spoke to, which were mainly guides, there was a diversity of opinion, and actually people were saying, well, actually, the regime might need to change. They had different views about who might be leader. They did talk about who leader. They had reference.
Very interesting.
But there was all sorts of, there was a diversity of view within a small spectrum. But actually there were people talking about these things. And I think your point is more special rather than your point over there.
You can keep the microphone.
No.
But I think if you go as a tourist, by the way,
Yes.
you get to see more than as a journalist. As a journalist, they are taking very special care of you and making sure that you see the fantasy of what North Korea was supposed to be like. And that's why it looks so very, very odd, because they're trying to present something that doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
We were also there a month ago.
Okay, we'll pass the microphone to you, then we can all hear you. One there, coming over to you next. And then we're going to move on to the proliferation question after this.
I think the observations you made about willingness to discuss issues facing the state is true. I mean, we had very frank discussions with our guide, admittedly in the bus when there was nobody else that could listen to him, about differing views on the history of the Korean War and the fact that there are two stories, and they were completely aware of the differences of story. And then the other thing, certainly that is very badly misrepresented in our press, is the ability to take photographs freely. We were just told to take pictures of whatever we wanted, as long as he wasn't looking at us at the time. And there was absolutely no control on the exit of what we took out or anything like that.
Can you just suck up what we've heard, a slight division in the panel? Can you follow it best by going, or is it best not to go?
Well, I think the observation. I think the observation you made a minute ago about as a journalist being much more restricted in what you see is exactly right.
Right.
Because as a tourist, you really can actually get quite a lot of open access.
Barbara Demick has just written the best book that's been written on North Korea. Absolutely fantastic book, Nothing to Envy. And she wrote that, I mean, she has actually since been, but she wrote that book based on the defectors that she spoke to, and she paints a very, very real and very live picture of what life is really like.
And I don't disregard that for a minute. And the defectors from North Korea have an important story to tell, because this is a state which persecutes its citizens.
Right, and just to the audience.
If you only interviewed Muslims who'd been rounded up in America after 9/11 and got them to tell their story, you would have a very different picture of the United States than I think is justified.
And here's the audience, and you're coming up, Mark.
The only thing I want to say, and it's kind of off track, is that it's a beautiful country. We went to China, we went to North Korea. I enjoyed being a tourist in North Korea more so than I did in China. It was unpolluted because they've got no cars. But it was a beautiful green country with people walking around in, we didn't get into delving into the politics of it and what their lives are like. And our guide did say that they don't have enough food, but there were certain attractions to it, and I don't know whether that was because we were being presented with what they wanted us to see. But, we took long bus rides throughout the country and we saw large parts of the country.
Okay. Now, just bear with me. You're going to react. You've got a question, then we're changing onto the proliferation question. So you react, and then there's a question there, Julie.
Yeah, I think it depends on the individual journalist's attitude toward the regime, the individual guard. As soon as you show some sort of antagonism against the regime, or if you start talking about the politics and how bad the country is, then they'll probably just close up their mouth.
Okay, and Julie, you said there was a question over there. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Jihei. It's not a question so much as sort of more information about inside North Korea that the people are suffering and that it's not just defectors that are saying these things. I was in the northeast region in China in the beginning of 2009 and beginning of 2008 and meeting with North Korean travelers, so people who were intending on going back to North Korea who had not abandoned their citizenship there. And they were talking about how they were just wondering, why can't I send my children to schools? Why can't my children get any education? Why do I have to bribe everybody to get anything done in this country? And they weren't criticizing the government. They were just frustrated and not understanding why their country is in that state. And they were wondering, why do I have to always worry about what kind of food I'm going to get in the next day? They just, so I think the people there, the defectors might have a very inflated kind of perception of the country. But I think it's very true that the people who are living there...
I'm sorry, I'm not saying that's inflated. I just want that clear. I'm just saying it's one perspective amongst several.
Yeah, the World Food Programme has been there for many, many years, and they've documented, 8 million people are dependent on World Food Programme aid. Malnutrition is rife. The average height of North Korean children is something like 5 inches lower than South Koreans now. I mean, you can just look at them to see there's a whole generation of stunted children. I'll make one very brief point. I first went there in April 1995. Which is at the time we later learned when the famine was just beginning and people were starting to die. They put me into I was by myself with 2 guides and a car, and they put me into hotels during the day to waste my time. They put me in the middle of a huge dining hall where I sat by myself, and they brought me 7 courses of food. The guides would not eat with me because they had to go somewhere else to eat. I was brought 7 courses to try and waste my 2.5 hours, 3 hours, so I wouldn't see anything in Nampo. I later learned that the famine was really underway by 1994. The second time they tried to do that, I had some rice and some kimchi and bolted out of the door and tried to actually look around the town of Nampo and I got away for half an hour. They rushed out after me, said, "Where is the foreigner?" and they'd found me within half an hour. So, it's not easy.
Now, no, in fact, what we're going to do now, if you don't mind, is just move to the questions of what this picture you painted, and thank you very much for adding to it from the rest of us, what we can say about the extension of nuclear power and nuclear weaponry. And Mark Fitzpatrick has been kept in reserve to this moment. Why, Mark?
Because I would disagree directly with Tim's question, or I would answer directly the question about what is the threat that North Korea poses. And I think I would say that even though I think that regime change is the only solution to most of the problems that North Korea presents, be it the nuclear threat, the missile threat, the human rights violations, there's that proverb, be careful what you wish for. And I'm worried about when Kim Jong Il dies. When Kim Il-sung was in charge, there were provocations enough. Charles referred to them, but I think you all, those who know history, know that, okay, the United States has conducted a lot of exercises and so forth, but it was North Korea that tried to assassinate not just one president of South Korea, but an entire cabinet. It was North Korea that conducted provocations, so many that if there was any inclination by the United States or by South Korea to invade or attack North Korea, there was ample reason to have done so over 30 years. They never did. And the reason was because, as Charles said, there are those artillery tubes pointed at the South, and the United States, and certainly South Korea, don't want to provoke another Korean War. Kim Jong Il comes to power, and he expands the threat by testing nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles that, if they could carry the nuclear weapons, and they probably could, now expand the threat beyond the Korean Peninsula to Japan, to other neighbors, potentially further afield. So yes, there is a real threat. North Korea, at the same time that they were negotiating with President Clinton under a policy of engagement, imported now a different kind of fissile material production capabilities from Pakistan, imported the uranium enrichment production, and sold reactor technology to Syria while they were negotiating with Clinton. So yes, they do present a threat. We have to contain them.
And you've been very patient with the rest of us. Does this succession add to your fears about proliferation? Is the moment of passage of power a moment of vulnerability for whatever fractious peace we have?
It creates possibilities of instability and unknowns. It's no minor issue that on the cusp of Kim Jong Un's appointment as a 4-star general, North Korea conducted yet another provocation, one we haven't seen for many years, in the sinking of the South Korean warship, killing 46 sailors.
Okay, now just pause there, because I know that there's a good argument to be had, which we will have about that. Can I just look around the room if I'm missing any of you? I've promised it is a public meeting, so no, not for the moment. So would you like to react down in this direction now to what we've just heard from Mark Fitzpatrick, that the succession is an opportunity for proliferation of technologies that they already have and for belligerence of their aims?
Yeah, don't disagree with anything that Mark has said, and I think I'm always puzzled that some people will always think that you're kind of making all this up, and that if North Korea is so hated by the Americans, there must be something good about it. It really is a threat. I could theorize it were there time. I mean, post-colonialism was mentioned. This is what happens if you, and we should be careful not to say the country, because of course it's a regime which doesn't really have any democratic mandate to rule over the people that it does, decides to be completely free and decides to be juche, that much debated word, I think basically means trying to be unbiddable. This is what happens if you don't want to be beholden to anybody. I supported this when I was younger because I support national liberation. I support the freedom of oppressed peoples. It wasn't supposed to turn into something like this. I'll even give them the benefit of the doubt and say, yes, you do feel threatened by the US. They were directly threatened by nuclear weapons twice during the Korean War, which admittedly they did start, and again in 1975 after the fall of Saigon. Again, if America does choose to elect a president as crass as George Bush, who does rhetorically announce an axis of evil, puts 3 countries on it. We now know North Korea got there by chance, just so we have one that wasn't Muslim, and then proceeds to invade one of them. I understand Kim Jong Il's feelings. Nonetheless, most small countries in the world, thankfully, think that they can get their security in another way, either by cleaving to a large ally or through collective security to the UN. Most of them, thank goodness, don't feel they have to have their own. Every nasty thing you can have. 2 kinds of nuclear weapons, as has been said, chemical, biological, etc., etc. This is not the action of a responsible state. And loads of people have tried to calm it down. Bill Clinton tried. Things were better in the Clinton era, it must be said.
Julie, question over here. And as you come down, will you add to what you know about the arsenal? Because I don't think we have actually spelt out what weapons are going to proliferate. Charles, would you react to what we've heard?
Yeah, I mean, North Korea is a threat, but North Korea is also threatened, and the strategy of the regime is to survive, and they've hit on a strategy that so far has worked pretty well for them, actually. Not many people would have thought that they would have lasted as long as this after the death of Kim Il-sung, especially with the famine and all the pressure from the outside world. But they've found that by building up their own deterrent, as they like to call their nuclear weapons, by building up their artillery presence, by this general show of force, they've found that they can shake down the rest of the region. They've extracted lots of aid from the South Koreans over the years. They've got lots of help from the Chinese, who see them as a buffer to keep the Americans away from their border. So this is a strategy for survival, and the North Koreans are going to continue doing it.
Just taking a break to come to you.
Yeah, hi, my name's Tom Keating. I was also there on holiday this summer.
Who knew about this burgeoning holiday trade in North Korea?
I'm a banker. It's the only place that would take me for holiday. But anyway, we also had late night drinks and so on with the guides and the minders, and on the bus when we're heading to the south of the country, the subject of nuclear weapons came up, and the thing which really struck me was the guy was talking about history. And then there was this, and then we got nuclear weapons, and now no one's going to touch us. We feel relaxed. This concept of juche, self-reliance, at least as far as the people we spoke to, and there was a Korean speaker in our group who managed to kind of talk to people when we were out and about. At least as far as they were concerned, the issue of nuclear weapons basically meant that they were safe from the axis of evil speech. They could all quote that axis of evil speech. That was the most stupid thing anyone has ever done. But for them, nuclear weapons were basically peace and security, full stop.
Ji Young-song, I interrupted you.
Yeah, I mean, like you just said, nuclear capability is their sort of national pride. They are so proud to have the nuclear weapons, so that it's the only way to protect this country from Western influence. And it's to see the same thing from a different perspective. Half glass full, half empty. This succession can be seen as an opportunity to engage with the regime. It's not just creating the tensions around the Korean Peninsula by doing the joint exercise all the time and creating this danger of nuclear proliferation. But the regime itself now is not stable. It has to go through several stages in order to have the final successor.
And Tim, we are looking at proliferation now. We've heard a lot of your philosophy, and I just wonder if how this is a
strong word.
Well, all right, ramblings.
Thank you.
And I wonder how this. No, that's a strong word. I beg your pardon. I wonder how you would apply what you've said, which many people have found very interesting, to the question of expansion and proliferation and threat.
Okay. The first thing is factually, North Koreans' conventional forces do not pose a threat to anyone, with the possible minor exception of South Korea, but frankly they're so heavily outgunned that they don't even pose a threat there. Nuclear weapons for North Korea is a big card player's version of asymmetric warfare. We've got this, you lot have got that, you ain't going to touch us. It's as simple as.
Nuclear weapons, I don't think North Korea, if they use them, that would be the end of everything in Pyongyang. But nuclear weapons also can give North Korea a kind of a freedom of movement to conduct provocations elsewhere, in the belief that they have the second strike capability. So it's too simplistic to say that their conventional weapons don't hurt anyone. The families of the 46 sailors would disagree with that directly. The people living in Seoul in range of the artillery would disagree.
If you actually accept the evidence that the Cheonan was sunk by North Korea. It could be, it could have been, but if you look at the evidence, it simply is
I've looked
conclusive.
I've looked very, very deeply at the evidence, and this is my business, and I'm not saying that you are necessarily wrong, because
I say
but
that you're wrong.
I think that some people would also say that it was South Korea that attacked in 1950 to start the Korean War. And you say, well, okay, there's two arguments, so either one might be true. Well, it's simply not the case that South Korea attacked the North. You look at the Soviet documentary evidence from their archives, and it's conclusive, which country started that war. And that's why there is a real concern that even though they are outgunned, conceivably they might attack, even though they might, they know that in 10 days they'd be wiped out.
Just going back to that whole question about the threat to North Korea. I mean, people talk about the evil empire speech that Bush made, but actually, if you look at the whole,
that was Reagan, the evil empire. He was axis of evil.
I'm sorry, axis of evil. The axis of evil speech, which everyone talks about. If anything, in terms of the nuclear proliferation, the Bush administration was rather indulgent towards North Korea because they got away with a lot more under Bush than they did under Clinton. The real danger to North Korea came under Clinton in 1994, when they were very seriously contemplating a strike on the Yongbyon nuclear facility. Clinton was prepared to go to war, and they were actually on the point of bringing in divisions from the outside. So there was a genuine threat, and the North Koreans, from their point of view, do perceive that.
Tim Tate, to you in a second. Just let's not sit on the audience, because the audience are the meeting. And it's over to you.
It works, yeah. Hello, my name is Marie. I'm a student. I'm a research student at SOAS. And I have many things to say, but I try to organize my ideas. Just one thing, I went to a conference in the US about 3 weeks ago, organized by an NGO which I can't name, that works inside North Korea. And one of the speakers there was a scholar from the US, a policymaker, whatever, which I can't name either, who actually said that it doesn't matter, for the US, it doesn't matter who succeeds, because it's going to be the same, and there's not going to be any change to the nuclear issue. For most people in South Korea, I spent a year in South Korea researching, the 6-party talks is actually a waste of money and time. But that's not the... I'm here because I care about the people of North Korea, and it's a shame that you don't really mention that in the succession issue. How could a new leader actually be there to improve the lives of ordinary North Koreans inside North Korea? But then the thing is, my question is that the succession meeting that took place last week, to me, was, to my humble opinion, was a non-event, because everybody, I read every possible website and every possible piece of news about North Korea, and everybody was speculating about the next leader, but the next leader hasn't been officially, to my understanding, appointed yet. Because the sister was appointed 4-star general, the son was too, and Kim Jong Il was re-elected for 30 years. So my question is whether is this? They said that they also postponed the meeting, and they said like claiming logistical reasons like the rain and stuff. But my question is, is there any possibility that they have to agree with each other with the sister and the brother-in-law? I don't remember what his name is. Could it be that there is issue there, or would it be that they're afraid of social unrest since the currency change was attributed to Kim Jong Un,
okay,
and that was a real failure that brought about social unrest in North Korea. Could that be the reason why, or is it just a struggle of power?
Right. No, thank you.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Thank you for coming, and thank you for bringing us your thoughts directly. Can you answer, and also for those of us who aren't as well informed as our friend in the audience, will you remind us the name of the sister, who she's married to, and react to the question from our friend? But do give us a briefing. We have come to pick your brains, all of us. I want to know the sister's name. I want to know who she's married to. She knows more than me. I'm annoyed about it. So, and then you can all answer this question, and then we'll take some more.
So the day before, just the day before the party's conference, which is different from party congress. Party congress is for whole party members. Party conference is more like a delegate meeting. Kim Jong Un, who's the third son of Kim Il-sung, as well as Kim Il-sung's sister, whose name is Kim Jong Il, was appointed as 4-star general. And Chang Song-taek has been in power for ages, but this purpose of this party conference is to strengthen the role of the party, because the party hasn't really been functioning for the past few decades because of the National Defense Commission was in power, and the chairman of the National Defense Commission is Kim Jong Il, and Kim Jong Il can't appoint anyone who can replace him as a chairperson of the National Defense Commission. But Kim Jong Un, third son of Kim Jong Il, was appointed as vice chairman of the party's military commission, which is significant. So you're telling our friend that's the important detail. The fact that he was a 4-star general. So what? But vice chairman of the military commission of the party. That's what you need to know. That's your brief. That's what's just your takeaway from tonight. And Charles, do react in the same vein, adding detail where you can.
Yeah, I mean, nothing is certain. I mean, that's the whole point of this. I mean, I think we start off from the premise that when it comes to North Korea, nobody knows. I mean, there is no media in North Korea. There is a government information service that puts out sort of statements, and all people can do is look at the photographs and see who's sort of standing next to who, and who's appearing, who's standing behind Kim Jong Il when he visits the Ladies Artillery Unit on the East Coast. You know, it's that sort of game. It's just that it's often quite subtle. When they have the first party conference in 30 years, and suddenly a son that nobody, of the 3 sons, a son that nobody has really seen much of, suddenly makes a dramatic appearance in the front row, dressed in a Mao suit, looking very much like his granddad. You know, people put 2 and 2 together, but nothing is certain in North Korea, and you know, anything can happen.
Let me answer the question directly. You know, the question is who's running North Korea, and is it just, you know, one guy, and what's going to happen when he dies? It's not just one guy, and I might take slight exception to Aidan's point. It's a dictatorship, but there's a military, this defense commission, the military commission is what's really running North Korea. And, you know, the third son had to be named a general in order to be put on the defense commission. That's the importance of being named a general. And this military commission, yeah, they probably, you know, could have a power struggle, and we just don't know. But they also probably realize that if they don't hang together, they're all going to hang separately, because the country's in so much trouble. So the purpose of this one-day conference of the party was to put the party's imprimatur on these appointments to the Defense Commission and the other appointments. And by the way, there are some other interesting appointments that were made. And the one thing that might give us all hope is that 3 people who moved up the chain of command in the foreign ministry all have been dealing with 6-party talks as the basis of their career the last decade. And they all, you know, Kung Sung-nam, Kim Jong-hae, and
Yong-ho, the other Yong-ho.
Yeah, and the other. Anyway, and since they've all been dealing with the United States, they're supposed to be American experts, and maybe this gives some, you know, hope that they really will be seeking engagement, and, you know, certainly Obama is seeking engagement. So I'm not saying engagement is the answer to anything. North Korea is not going to give up its nuclear arsenal, but you know, engagement at least can help to try to contain the problem, to keep it from exploding again.
Yeah, we seem to be sort of merging the 2 halves of the thing, which is fine by me. Trying to draw out something which I think has only been implicit so far in some of the disagreements among us in a positive way. If there were a lens of hostility, and if, as I think Jeong suggested, there might be an opportunity now, that rather suggests that the view that which is quite widespread, though not shared by me, that if only other people did something different, we would somehow unlock the key, that somehow all that banging the North Koreans are making is in some way they're kind of knocking on the door and they kind of want to come in from the cold. I don't believe that. It's not a priori. I just look at the evidence, and I don't think that's been the case for a long time. So I kind of hope. Equally, I rule nothing out. I mean, we're now in a very uncertain period. Something could happen with the new guy. It may be that to sort of stake his claim, he will suddenly surprise us with Chinese-style economic reforms. God knows the Chinese have been sort of urging them to do that. I think that's more likely as it happens. I think if we see reform and change, it will begin at home on the economy long before it comes to the nuclear issue.
My nervousness is that I may come across as something of an apologist for Pyongyang, which I am not. But I worry deeply about the set of assumptions which underlies or appears to underline everything that the four of you have said. A, the threat. B, coming in from the cold. And there is an assumption that coming in from the cold is automatically a good thing. And secondly, that Chinese-style economic reforms are automatically a good thing.
Better than starving.
Well, I mean, when we talk about starving, I think what tends to get airbrushed out of this particular picture is the economic sanctions which Washington imposed on Pyongyang. Now, you can say they were right to do so.
They make no difference. There was no US trade. I mean, 50 years of it. It makes no difference at all.
The Americans have been giving aid.
I know the Americans have been giving aid, but
the Russians pulling the plug was what.
Right, we'll come to you. Just make your point, Tim.
The assumption that the Washington consensus that neoliberal economic reforms are going to make everything good for everybody.
No, nasty Chinese state capitalism would be great.
Is a very dangerous assumption, and it seems to underlie when we use phrases like coming in from the cold and attack or resent the notion that a nation can or should say we're going to try and run it our way. And I'm not saying they're getting it right.
Right,
it's just the assumption which underlies this is horribly dangerous.
Hold your thoughts, panel. To you?
Yeah, I think that the domestic perception, and we were told this by quite a number of people that we encountered there, is that the sanctions actually are a cause of a lot of the misery that the population of the country is experiencing.
Jill?
That's why there's no fuel, that's why there's no food.
Let me give you some North Korean perspective, although I'm not North Korean. But North Korea has been trying to get attention from the Western society, especially from the US. You know, remember, Korea is still at the state of war. You know, the war ended with the armistice. There is no peace agreement. There is no normalization between the US and the DPRK. And they've been trying to get attention from the US and as well as other Western countries. They've tried the economic reform, which no one has paid attention to. So they failed, completely failed, and one of the keepers who's responsible for the reform was prosecuted or executed, whatever. He's gone now. Now, the only option they have to get attention from the international society is this provocation. But don't take provocation as the real danger to the world. It can be they just use it as a diplomatic tactic to talk to negotiate with other people.
Can I say, I mean, I'm so old that I tend to think that everybody's as old as I am and they remember stuff. The reason why the North Korean economy is a mess is basically because it is badly run. That's the main reason. There's never been any trade with America, so trade with America is neither here or there. I am so old that I remember in the early 1970s, North Korea, which till then had traded only with the Soviet Union and China, and a little bit with Japan, suddenly started borrowing money from the West. Everybody was, not the Americans because they aren't allowed to, everybody in the West was terribly keen to lend to them. Loads and loads of Western banks, except American ones, export credit guarantee departments in friendly countries like Sweden, also Japan and so forth. Lots of money was lent, factories were bought, etc. This was in the early 1970s. Anybody know what happened? They never paid for it. North Korea invented the Third World Debt Crisis, and it's still there. They've never paid for it. I reached the conclusion, I worry that I come across Orwellian socialist that I am as a right-wing dogmatist. I reached the conclusion, not a priori, and I was a fan at that time, remember, that they actually hadn't intended to pay for it.
Right, no.
They thought this was clever.
I'm sorry, just a simple
That's
question.
why they're in a
I
mess.
don't doubt that the North Korean economy is badly run.
And they deceive and they cheat.
And I would just ask you, how well run is the American economy?
A little better than that.
I don't think we had 2 million people starve to death in the 1990s. I don't think we've seen our economy collapse I mean,
You haven't
goodness
seen your
gracious,
economy
Tim,
collapse. No,
you have to be. I mean, get realistic.
You haven't seen your economy collapse because China buys your debt. It's as simple as that.
Okay, so why don't we have a session about the evils of America? But we're talking about what's wrong with North Korea, and to say that
As
what's wrong,
perceived
of
by
course,
America.
Look, of course, the North Korean people you meet will say their economy collapsed because of America's sanctions, because that's the party line. But if anybody, and look at every enemy of America would say the same thing. Every communist state said the same thing. But any analysis of the communist system would say it was the communism itself was the problem.
And any analysis of the capitalist system would say that capitalism has repeatedly failed and dumped the populations of the capitalist world in the deep doo-doo repeatedly.
And coming to you in the audience, should I be
I'm not saying either's better. I'm simply saying
I think being able to eat is better.
I think
That's
one
what
of
I
them's
think.
better.
Should I be surprised that already in the evening, the big thing that's coming out is US versus North Korea, so an otherwise very, very small place, through the history and the armaments that and the attitude that you're talking about, is somehow this huge stick for this giant superpower. And is that the subtext here, that what we're really talking about when we're talking about North Korea is the United States? No?
Totally not. To hell, with all respect to Mark Fitzpatrick, to hell with America. This is sort of Chomsky and inverted nonsense. Everything is not about America always. It's about how some people thought they chose freedom and ended up in something that's a complete nightmare. America is a bit part.
Charles, to you, and then the audience, and I've spotted you.
I mean, I think you could make an argument that America has been provocative towards North Korea when it suits it. There was in 2002, when the whole nuclear crisis re-emerged, a lot of people in the region, including the Japanese and the South Koreans at the time, as well as the Chinese, thought the Americans, it was Rumsfeld basically looking for missiles, but they provoked the renewed nuclear crisis, and it was unnecessary to do so. And that was certainly the consensus view in the region at the time. In the end,
North Korea imported enriched uranium from Pakistan. That's what provoked the crisis.
The other people in the region, the South Koreans, the Japanese, thought it could have been handled better rather than an outright
It could have been handled
confrontation.
better,
Yeah.
but what provoked it was North Korea's actions.
And we're in the section of the meeting which is who is threatened.
My question isn't that, but...
Well, then you may not be able to ask it.
Okay. Well, there's a very interesting point there. We haven't actually addressed what the Koreans want. The simple point is, where are they trying to go with this? They're not actually achieving anything. They've got a horrible economy, people in misery, lots of people around them, threatening them. What are they actually trying to achieve apart from a dynasty staying in power?
That's what it is. The regime wants to survive in a hostile world.
And then, if succession comes, is there a direction of travel? Will this dynasty start to open up, or is it just simply stronger and stronger power and control over the country?
Well, we haven't even got to the next son yet, so it's got to be one step at a time.
That's right. I think, this is a recent view I've come to, and it can be as wrong as all my other views. I think they'll fall into China's lap. China, I think, China has alone has the means, with its great wealth now, which used to be much less than North Korea's, of course, per capita, and has the motive, because it doesn't want chaos on its borders above all else, to when the North Korean regime finally sees that the old way has run out of road, which I think it has. The economy is not self-sustaining in any way. We can argue forever about why that is so, but the fact is so. The nuclear thing, what I call militant mendicancy, being a beggar and a mugger and basically getting people to pay you to pretend to be starting to give the things up. I think that's out of road. No one wants to play that anymore. The Chinese, it's just a question of whose lap they'll fall into. Somebody will give the North Koreans some food eventually. Somebody will start modernizing all the infrastructure that some of you have seen more recently than I have. China will wait. The whole business that the West feels it has to go through of sort of UN sanctions and all that doesn't really get anywhere. The Chinese are quietly buying everything. I think in 10 years' time it'll be theirs, probably. Not officially, of course, just a satellite.
I have one point and one question. The point is that I appreciate the questions you're asking about the assumptions that we are making. I don't know if this is your point, but I disagree with kind of setting a prescription for what North Korea should do and setting sort of international values and standards for what should happen, and therefore North Korea should do that, and it's not following that, and that's what's wrong. I don't believe we should do that. The thing that angers me about North Korea is when the people are trying to make a living for themselves by starting markets, by going and participating in whatever activity they can to make a living for themselves, that North Korea clamps down and creates these policies such as women under the age of 40 cannot get on bicycles because that would make them participate in markets. I don't like it when people are expressing some kind of desire that the North Korean government has to clamp down on them. That's what I don't appreciate. And the question I have is, if military power is what North Korean government is using for legitimacy, it's going to maintain that. It seems like that's the only option they have. If we're saying that that's a danger to us, what other option do they have? What other source of legitimacy can they look for? It seems like they have no other option, and that's why they're clinging to it for their dear lives.
Let's go down the panel with that.
Yeah, what they could have chosen was the path that was outlined in the six-party talks in 2005. A process of denuclearization, of restoration of relations with the United States, of relations with Japan, huge economic assistance from Japan. That was all supposed to happen. And it all stopped in 2008. And you know, it's a terrible tragedy. Now, I'm not saying that it was totally one-sided. There were points which was mishandled. But that really should have been. Now, they have nuclear weapons and they're not going to give them up. So then what do we do now? That's the real question, isn't it?
I just want to say I share exactly your view, and it's what I said earlier. If a country persecutes its people, it's a bad country. I would say that in the time I was in North Korea, I saw plenty of women under 40 riding bicycles.
You asked questions about what Koreans want. There's a great gap between South Korea and what South Koreans think and what North Korea think. North Korean, it's public propaganda. It's always been peaceful reunification, whereas under this South Korean regime, people try to describe North Korea as different nation. Even they're a different nation from us. It's more like an interstate relation rather than inter-Korean relations. So there's that big gap between North Korean and South Korean people. But what North Korea should do, or should have done, is I think we don't see the. It's really important to see what's not seen in North Korean propaganda. And we've already seen a third son of Kim Il-sung, but we don't know anything about the first son or second son. First son, we don't know much about him, but he's been involved in the IT industry. We know he faked his passport, Dominican passport, to go to Japan's Tokyo Disneyland. But he was also looking at the IT industry in Japan, so he's not as stupid as you think.
Ji-young, what do you want?
What do I want? Well, I speak like a North Korean spokesperson, but it's their sovereign right to decide whatever they want to do.
Well, unfortunately, it's not really what the North Koreans want, because they don't have a say in the matter. It's what the elite in North Korea wants, the elite in the army and the people around Kim Jong Il. And a lot of them were very close to the East Germans, and they took a very big lesson from what happened in East Germany. They saw what happened to all their old comrades who lost their position, lost their status. They know that in North Korea, if it goes down, they're going to be lucky to get away with their lives. They're pretty good. They've held on for 15 years. It still looks pretty solid. There's no sign that it's breaking up either within the elite or from below. So I think it would be a mistake to write them off too soon.
And can I ask you here with us in the meeting, the section of the meeting which was who is threatened, is that being addressed sufficiently? Shall we move on, or do you want to spend a little bit more time? Here you've got a view on the front, here we are, and everyone else, that's kind of what's brought us into the room. So I'm proposing to move on unless you tell me that you haven't heard it answered. Do introduce yourself.
James Thacker, I am an authority on nuclear weapons, so I trust that it's...
Please use a microphone, or I have to come over there.
There are three things about a nuclear weapon that makes Korea completely unlike any other question. I mean, the most likely place for nuclear exchange up until now is Pakistan, India. Korea is not like China. I think America is completely not a part of this question. The thing about nuclear that's particular is starvation, sanity, and not being lovable. And if you're not lovable, you're eligible for a first strike. Nuclear deterrence is based on the fact that you are identified with the person you're with. Starvation makes them extremely desperate, and they're probably the only country in the world that is perceived even by the Chinese of not being mentally stable. I mean, and not having any clear succession.
So you're warning us that...
So I think Korea is likely a place for a first strike, and a first strike of them, not only of them outward, but of them being struck.
And do you feel threatened in this, James? So do you feel threatened?
Do I feel personally threatened? Well, I felt threatened since 1945. Yeah.
Would you like to keep the microphone, and let's just ask the panel to react to what you're saying? He's telling us that if you look at nuclear gameplay, which we all learned after the Cold War, mutual assured destruction was, we all look the same, we're not going to come after you, you're not going to come after me. He's saying they don't look the same, they're half mad, and they could do you and you could do them. What do you think?
Well, I think you've slightly exaggerated what James said, but I think any country that acquires nuclear weapons for the first time, there's a huge period of instability. When the United States and Soviet Union had them, they came close to a nuclear exchange over the Cuban Missile Crisis. India and Pakistan came close to an exchange in 2001. With North Korea having nuclear weapons, I think there are various elements of instability that are very dangerous. So, no, sitting in London, I don't feel threatened because they're not going to attack me here. But I have friends living in Seoul and in Tokyo, and I feel that they are under a real direct possibility of a nuclear exchange. That's dangerous.
Would you like to speak? I know it's...
I was there last year and I felt threatened.
I'm glad you said that you'd felt threatened since 1945, because any nuclear weapons are a bloody stupid idea. And the elephant in the room is that there are nuclear weapons in a lot of other unstable regions. I personally think that the North Asian region and the South China Seas are probably the most dangerous region in the world today, and the most likely flashpoint for something. But Pakistan has nuclear weapons, India has nuclear weapons, and here's the big elephant in the room, Israel has nuclear weapons. And we don't apparently, and I'm trying desperately to see this from inside Pyongyang's viewpoint, but well, the Americans don't have a go at Israel, which acquired nuclear weapons unlawfully.
They're not starving. Please use my...
But I'm sorry, that simply isn't a sustainable geopolitical justification for saying, oh, you're not starving, so you can have nuclear weapons. No, I mean, that just doesn't fly.
No, but the point is that what is going to spark a nuclear exchange? And there are reasons why a North Korea possession of nuclear weapons and their willingness to sell nuclear technology to other countries, as they've done at least once, and they may be doing with Burma, does raise the stakes in ways that Israel's not. Now, like, you're not an apologist for North Korea. I won't be an apologist for Israel and say, yes, their nuclear weapons are fine. But, you keep trying to change the subject. The subject here is, what is the threat that we feel from North Korea? And it's real.
I'm not trying to change the subject.
Well, you keep saying the United States, Israel, Pakistan, India.
I'm simply
Wait a minute, I did the affidavits for Vanunu, so I'm not apologising
I'm not trying
for
to
Israel.
change the subject. And it is simply, you have to look at threat. And there is a classical, as you know better than I do, a classical doctrine which teaches you to assess threat and counter threat.
Okay.
And in any rational system, the global threat posed by North Korea is way down the list.
We're just getting reaction to James, and then actually I am going to change the subject and ask about proliferation around the world. That's how we're going to end. But Charles, you wanted to come in and...
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're half mad. I think they've actually shown a very good understanding of the strategic situation. They're brilliant at playing off the Chinese against the South Koreans and the Japanese against the Americans. It's the game they used to play with the Russians and the Chinese. They understand what China's core interests are, and they kind of play to that, and they don't listen to all the rhetoric and all the nonsense. Sorry?
As a rival to the Chinese?
They don't like the Chinese. They think the Chinese are trying to take them over. So they like to keep the Chinese in balance with lots of other players in the region. But they're good at it. But they do take risks. But when they're confronted hard, then they tend to sort of look for a way out. So they're not mad. They want to survive. And they're not going to gratuitously invade some other country. But they are dangerous, and part of the game plan is to appear dangerous. Because if you appear dangerous, then people take you seriously. And if you don't appear dangerous, you get walked all over.
That's sane. Under the old mutual assured destruction rule, you had to appear that you would use them. There's no point having them if you ain't going to use them, and that's been the argument. We've even heard it here recently.
Comrade Leader, I was just wondering why you wanted to move us away from North Korea to talk about proliferation around the world. Can't we talk about North Korea?
Well, I would absolutely do it that democratically. Julie, who runs the event, suggested I went out on proliferation around the world, but I'll take the lead from the audience. If I hear you mention other countries, I'm going to blame you. But otherwise, we will stick specifically on the question of North Korea. In which case, thanks for that. So I'll take the lead from you. But there's only 10 minutes left. Anyone who hasn't asked anything or made a point yet, yes. Can we go to the back, and then just because it makes Julie walk further, and then we'll come to the front because it's the same purpose. So there's a 10-minute warning. Man who looks like Oliver Reed. No, that one there, yes. And then we'll come to the front. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. I'm not Oliver Reed. I'm Daniel Levitsky, a lecturer from UCL in Russian history, actually, but I dabble in North Korea rather unsuccessfully often. But I just want to pick up on the point. I first of all having been to North Korea 6 times as a tour guide, sort of lecturer, but I had to be slightly careful what I did.
On holiday, can I ask? On holiday?
I was working for 3 of the visits and on holiday for 3 of them, yeah. I don't feel threatened by North Korea particularly, because the whole point, I think I see them as having learned an awful lot from the Korean War, actually. If you look at the photographs of the destruction, the northern part of the peninsula, during and after the Korean War, and they have proudly spent the last half-century building their country up. They want to survive, they want to preserve that, and I really don't think that they're going to take any risks. They are pretty realistic, I think. I think they learn from history. They're rather obsessed with their own history, actually. They don't really want to live in the present. But I don't feel threatened by them because I think that they are very, very dependent, ultimately, I think, now on China, economically. China really could turn the lights out in Pyongyang. The lights are already mostly out anyway, but they really could turn them all out. And therefore, I don't feel threatened because they want to survive, and that's it. If they don't survive, there's no point. So where's the threat? I don't understand. I understand that they have nuclear weapons, and that seems dangerous. But that's all I see.
Well, that alone, to me, is the problem. That a country that newly acquires nuclear weapons is a very dangerous situation before they've acquired the command and control, before they, work out channels of communication with the potential enemy, and that lack of communication is a big problem today. So no, I don't think they would purposely attack South Korea, but I do think they would purposely sell a nuclear weapon to another country, because they have sold nuclear weapons technology, they've sold missile technology, and what else do they have to sell? So that's why I feel threatened. Not personally my security, but I do.
Proliferation.
Proliferation is a threat.
Keep the microphone and let's go down the panel reacting to you. You're nodding. Well, would you like to react to what you've heard?
Do you mind if I wait a minute?
No, not at all. You're the boss.
All proliferation is a threat. The notion that we should simply say we should be talking about North Korea as an isolated, great mass threat, because it does, I don't disagree with you at all, forgive me, it does enable proliferation. Then again, so do other countries enable proliferation, Western countries too. Where do we think Israel got her?
I'll give you that one. That was 50 years ago.
But it's still proliferation. All of it is wrong, all of it is bad. You don't solve that by hitting them with a big stick.
The DPRK poses threat, but we can maneuver. Well, it's not only the U.S., South Korea as well. Personally, I'm South Korean citizen, so I wish South Korea could do more, engaging with North and bringing back to the peace and security in the region.
Well, they use threats to bolster their diplomatic position. They escalate the tension in the region. They get the Japanese worried. Sometimes they pick on the Japanese, sometimes they pick on the South Koreans, sometimes they rattle the Americans. They sort of take it in turns and go around. They rattle the cage, and that works out pretty well for them. I mean, they've managed to extract quite a lot of aid even from the Americans. The South Koreans were giving them vast amounts of rice and fertilizer over the last 12 years or so before they cut it off recently with the sinking of the ship. They do hostile things.
And it will be very interesting to see if we now see less of this. I mean, I think we may have a similar view in that the role of China is increasing. China is careful what it does and does not criticize, but as I'm sure you know, the one thing they criticize directly and firmly is the 2 times when the North Koreans have undertaken nuclear tests. Working the other way, though, is the notion that politically Kim Jong Un sort of needs to come in with a bang. And I may mean that all too literally. Am I allowed to ask you, presuming your 6 trips have been spread over a period of time, I was really intrigued by the people earlier who talked about differences of opinion among the guides. I've heard this too, but only really in the last year or so. I mean, I wonder whether you were found, because obviously it's up to the people of North Korea, the ones who, not us, nor Kim Jong Il, nor Kim Jong Un, what their future should be. It's great that they're now talking about it.
I'd be interested if they were talking actually about the leader.
Or about any. I'd be interested if they're talking about anything.
You've got to answer now.
That was the
I've got to answer. Right, so on the issue of proliferation, I agree almost entirely with Tim, actually, in terms of that all proliferation is a threat, and I don't see why we focus on North Korea. I don't see it as the biggest threat when it comes to proliferation, really, in a direct sense. I think that the attention we give that issue in relation to the human rights issues in the country is disproportionate. So I don't feel a huge sense of threat. Of course, there is a small sense of threat because North Korea is a very, very nasty regime and it is aggressive and provocative in some ways. But no more so, I think, than many other nations who actually have a far, far stronger base, which should make us feel more threatened.
And Aidan's question about the guides?
On the guides, yes, absolutely spot on. I mean, my first trip was in 2001, and I then went back several times in 2005. And in that 4-year period, during which the big economic changes of 2002 had come in, markets started to come in, I met actually the same guys, but it was actually almost like meeting different people because they were so much more open and so much more willing to talk.
Right.
So that's what I'd say on that.
Thank you. 5-minute warning. You're next. Some comments, and then you can have your closing remarks ready to go, members of the panel. Here we go.
Hi, my name is Chris King. I'm no idea about North Korea, but what I have been to is a lot of talks here, and what is striking to me is the parallel between these discussions about North Korea and discussions about the threat from Iran. And I think it's all about, the feeling I get is that what these countries are doing with nuclear weapons is they are doing the best they can to deal with a very big external threat. And it's the biggest stick they can wave. And I just wanted to comment on the parallels I see between the discussion here and discussions about Iran.
I'd buy that. I think it's a horrible stick, and I don't think anyone should do it. But if you wanted to look at where the threat is, the real serious threat of a flashpoint, I would look under the South China Seas. Within 10 years, you're going to have 100 very highly capable subs from 10 rival countries, each riven by historical and other disputes. The Jiangnan, I think, is a harbinger of what will come. The Malaccan Straits is where 80% of China's oil goes through. China wants that sea as its own backyard. The United States isn't going to allow it to have that. That place is a mess, and I think nuclear is a side issue.
These are closing remarks from all of us now. So to you, James. No, James.
I have such a loud voice. We've never seen a nuclear.
I feel the same every time you speak without a microphone.
We've never seen a failed nuclear state. Pakistan is inching that way, and what worries me about Korea is in this discussion I've heard about human rights violations, 2 million dead people. And I'm also hearing that they're doing fine. I mean, which is it? If this is a failed state, it's a very dangerous place to have nuclear weapons.
You don't think China has exactly the same problems writ large?
Tim, keep that for your closing remarks, Tim.
They're saying.
Keep it for your closing remarks.
1 out of 2.
Yes?
How would you lessen the perceived threat that some people said, all the threats? And would it be more trade, for example, investment in the mines that they have?
Add that to your closing remarks. Anyone else who's been bursting to say something? You have already spoken, so you can't say anything else. Right. So it's very important to keep, I think, to time in our first Wednesday meetings. So I am going to be ruthless. I started 2 minutes late. I'm going to end 2 minutes early. And if we want you to come again, you're very busy people. And I promise to begin and end on time. So panel, in the reverse order to which we began, would you wrap up taking in some points that you were asked to address? How would you reduce the threat? Even the problem of Pakistan, if you wish. But please take your time. We've come to listen to you. We've been very interested. Give us your closing remarks, starting with you, Aidan.
I'm conscious that the time is short because there's another meeting in this room, isn't there? I'm just very grateful to have been here. I am a proud and guilty North Korea-centric, as I've probably made boringly clear. I only look at Korea. I look at South Korea as well. I don't really look at other countries. This is doubtless my mistake. I don't look at it in comparison to Iran, though I'm sure the comparison's a good one through the US lens. I'm sure the South China Seas are difficult, but I would hope that as you are all persons of affairs and you're interested in many things and you come to lots of talks, thankfully we live in the age of the internet. I hope your interest in North Korea doesn't stop. Well, obviously, as you've been with this evening, there is endless amounts of information. Please go and read all you can, and let us hope we get some sort of a soft landing where stuff gets better in North Korea and with North Korea for the people of that country who get to determine their own fate. With or without Kim Jong Un.
Well, the best bet for North Korea is gradual change rather than anything too cataclysmic. One of the big changes that I have seen is the amount of information that is getting into the country. Since the famine, the border with China opened up, much more became porous for a few years. There are crackdowns, it tightens up. But the North Koreans now, as we're hearing from people who've been there recently, they do know more about the outside world, they do know more about the nature of their own regime, they do know more about the predicament of their own country. And if that can progress, that will probably be a good thing. I think the danger with the Korea, as always, is that it becomes a battleground for the region. You say, why are we worried about nuclear weapons in North Korea? Well, what we're really worried about, or what the Americans are really worried about, is China and Japan. And a nuclear North Korea, a declared nuclear North Korea with miniaturized warheads on missiles that can threaten the region will probably push the Japanese into going nuclear, which they could probably do by 11 o'clock tomorrow morning if they so wished. Massive stockpiles of fissile material. A nuclear Japan, battles over East China Sea gas, arms race in Northeast Asia, the Chinese getting behind the North Koreans again as the buffer state, the Cold War returns, the Americans trying to encircle China again with the relations with Vietnam and India and all the whole game again. That's the danger, and North Korea is an irritant in that. It stirs things up, it plays China off against America, it provokes these confrontations, and that could be the way it goes.
Right. I'm very pleased to be here today to meet you, who are shows I'm interested in Korean affairs. But please do keep your interest in Korean affairs, not only when it's just doing some horrible, nuclear tests, or when you see some odd-looking 27-year-old four-star general in the news. That's what I want to say.
Good point.
I've just one thing to suggest, which is to keep in mind, the question I would always keep in mind, anything to do with North Korea, is says who. When you read something, I would ask yourself, who's saying it? The North Koreans do lie. They have a propaganda machine, but so does the rest of the world. I don't think you should take anything that is said on trust, and I do think you should question where you're getting your information from.
Trust journalists.
Or not, as the case may be.
No, always.
I agree with Tim on the point that all proliferation is bad. It was a huge mistake for France to have given Israel the nuclear plutonium reprocessing technology 50 years ago. It was a big mistake for Russia to have given it to China, and for China to have given it to Pakistan. And it was a big mistake for North Korea to give it to Syria, and if they give it to Burma, I think that could spark a war.
Right.
But, the moral equivalence that has been voiced tonight, I found abhorrent.
We can't really end on too much provocation.
Okay.
I mean, you've said it, but we all of us have enjoyed this. We do know you have an honest difference of opinion. We've been able to make up our minds a bit. So forgive me if it sounds I'm not trying to shut you down, but I am trying to end the evening.
And I don't believe in moral equivalence.
Okay, stop it. Can I just thank you very much? I felt very much as though this was a public meeting, which I enjoyed more than if I'd rambled on from the chair. You gave a great deal. You listened to everyone. It was what a great debate to listen to you all. So can I thank, on the end there, Aidan Foster-Carter, Leeds University, Tim Tate, sorry, I beg your pardon, Charles Scanlon, BBC correspondent, and next to him we see Ji Young-sung, consultant for the UN Office for the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Tim Tate, filmmaker, investigative journalist, Mark Fitzpatrick, Director of Non-Proliferation Disarmament Programme at the International Institute of Strategic Studies, and you for being a fantastic meeting, people. Thank you very much, everyone.
Well done.